All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another Downfield podcast. As always, I am your host and football aficionado, Jeff D. Thank you for coming on board with me today as I give you some colorful insight into some NFL football as we are just about to get into August and the start of mandatory training camps. This time of year is so exciting, so thank you all for spending less than an hour listening to me today. I hope that you all enjoy the show that I have for you. I apologize that it's been a while since I had my last podcast, but I was on vacation with my lovely wife before I start unintentionally ignoring her due to the NFL football season. My last show was about the state of the NFC South, and today I'm going to discuss the state of the NFC East. And as always, please like, share, comment, subscribe to whatever social media outlet you are watching this from. I am on Facebook, X, YouTube, Spotify, and my own site, www.downfieldread.com. It's a good idea to just go ahead and follow me everywhere online because sometimes I'll post on one social media outlet and not on another, so don't miss out on anything. Also, I'm trying to get this podcast channel off the ground so that I can actually do some contests, do some giveaways, have some fun stuff for everybody that listens, all the NFL fans out there. So in advance, thank you for taking this downfield read with me. Today, we are going to talk about the state of the NFC East.
And here we go.
Starting off in alphabetical order by city, we are going to start off with the Dallas Cowboys. Last year, the boys finished the regular season 12-5 and went undefeated at home. I predicted that Dallas would go 10-7 and make the playoffs, but then lose in the divisional round. Turns out that the Cowboys just couldn't wait until the divisional round and decided to lose in the wild card round instead to the Green Bay Packers. Their strength of schedule last year was tied with the Bears for third easiest, which helped them immensely to getting to those 12 wins and only proves that they were an overrated team in the loss in the playoffs last year. The ongoing discussion about the Cowboys is how few moves that they've made this offseason. So let's take a downfield read at what the 2024 boys will look like and what you can expect to see from them this year. At quarterback is 31-year-old Dak Prescott, who put up quite impressive numbers last year. Dak was tied for second in completion percentage at 69.5%. He was third in the league with 4,516 passing yards and first in passing touchdowns with 36. Prescott was also second in QBR and in passer rating. Let's make a couple of things clear right now. First of all, is that I am not a Cowboys fan. Second is that Dak is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. The disrespect that Dak and Brock Purdy get are absolutely ridiculous. Prescott literally finished in the top 5 of every major category for QBs last year. He's top 5, end of discussion.
Hell yeah!
Boy haters out there that don't think he's very good. The dude is 31. He could legitimately play in this league for another 8 to 10 years, and he's putting up top 5 numbers. Please stop discrediting this man. He is, for all intents and purposes, a great quarterback in the NFL. At running back, the Cowboys brought back 31-year-old Ezekiel Elliott, who spent the first 7 years of his career in Dallas before they decided that they just didn't want him anymore, only to get him back this year after he put up the worst numbers of his professional career. The main running back for Dallas last year was Tony Pollard in his 5th year with the Cowboys, who ran for 1,005 yards, which was good for 12th in the league, on 252 carries, which was 7th in the league. He also had 6 touchdowns, which is tied for 19th. Pollard is now apparently the replacement for King Henry in Tennessee. Good luck with that. Running backs Rico Dowdle and or Deuce Vaughn will likely take over for Zeke at some point in the upcoming season after he breaks his hip. Yes, that was an old man joke for everyone keeping track at home. At wide receiver, the Cowboys have one of the best in the game and a guy that I named my fantasy football team after. That is CeeDee Lamb, who led the league in receptions with 135, was second in receiving yards with 1,749, and third in receiving touchdowns with 12. Oh, and he was also first in yards after the catch with 680. And I expect Lamb to put up similar numbers this year as well. Behind him is Brandon Cooks. In his first year with Dallas last year, had 54 receptions for 657 yards and 8 touchdowns, which was tied for 8th. At wide receiver 3, pick your Jalen. Will it be Jalen Tolbert entering his 3rd year with the boys, who had 22 receptions for 268 yards and 2 touchdowns, or second-year man Jalen Brooks? At tight end, Jake Turd Ferguson
Jared Ferguson. It's a funny name.
is a keeper. So Jake Ferguson is the starting tight end for the Cowboys, and he is Fergalicious in his second pro season last year, having 71 receptions, which was ninth for tight ends, 761 receiving yards, which was eighth for tight ends, and 5 touchdowns, which was tied for seventh for all tight ends. As far as the offensive line, the Cowboys had a solid offense last year, arguably a top 5 offensive line, but they lost 2 pieces to free agency. They have a new left tackle this year, rookie Tyler Guyton, who was selected 29th overall. He will be replacing 33-year-old Tyron Smith. At left guard is Tyler Smith, entering his 3rd season after being picked 24th overall in 2022. At center is Brock Hoffman, who was an undrafted free agent in 2022 as well. He will be replacing Tyler Biadasz, who went to division rival Washington Commanders. Returning at right guard is Zach Martin, who will turn 34 years old this season and was drafted 16th overall in 2014 by the Cowboys. And right tackle is Terrence Steele, returning to the boys for his 5th season. As a unit, the Cowboys were 5th in total yards, 3rd in passing yards, 14th in rushing, and 1st in points scored, averaging 30 points per game. Notable offensive draft picks, as I mentioned before, offensive tackle Tyler Guyton, who I had actually going to Dallas at their original spot at number 24. So what a deal for the Cowboys that they were able to actually move back into the draft, still get Guyton 5 picks later at number 29. In the 3rd round, Dallas selected center Cooper Beebe from Kansas State at number 73 overall. Looking at the other side of the ball, the Cowboys had quite a few playmakers last year. Right defensive end Micah Parsons had 14 sacks, which was 7th, and 18 tackles for a loss, which was 6th. Left defensive end DeMarcus Lawrence had 10 tackles for a loss and 4 sacks, and defensive tackle Osa Odighizuwa had 9 tackles for a loss and 3 sacks. In the backfield, cornerback Deron Bland made a lot of headlines last year with 9 interceptions, which was 1st overall, in which 5 of those he returned for a touchdown, which obviously was 1st overall as well. 15 passes defended that he had was tied for 7th in the league. Cornerback Trevon Diggs played only 2 games last year due to a torn ACL, and cornerback Stephon Gilmore, who is still a free agent, had 2 interceptions and 13 passes defended. So let's look at who else is going to make up this defense in 2024. Dallas runs a 4-3 defense with defensive ends Lawrence, as I mentioned before, who is 32 years old, and Parsons, who is also at the other end. At the defensive tackle spot are Odighizuwa and 4th-year man Chauncey Golston, who had 1.5 sacks last year. At the linebacker positions, we have outside linebacker Damone Clark entering his 3rd year with Dallas, who had 70 solo tackles last year, which was 41st, and rookie outside linebacker Maurice Liafua, who had 3 sacks and a forced fumble with Notre Dame last year. At middle linebacker is 9-year vet Eric Kendricks, who spent 8 years with Minnesota before his 1-year stint with the Chargers last year, where he had 79 solo tackles, which was tied for 23rd, 3.5 sacks, and a forced fumble. In the defensive backfield are corners Bland and Diggs, who were mentioned before, alongside safety Donovan Wilson, entering his 6th year with Dallas, who had 2 picks and 3 passes defended last year, along with safety Malik Hooker in his 4th year with the boys, and also had 1 pick and 3 passes defended last year. Overall, the Cowboys gave up the 5th fewest yards last year, 5th fewest passing yards. They were 16th against the rush, and they allowed the 5th fewest points in the league. They were also 13th in total takeaways, 9th in interceptions, and 13th in total team sacks. Notable defensive players drafted were Marshawn Kneeland, who's an edge from Western Michigan, selected in the 2nd round, pick number 56 overall, and linebacker Liafua, who I had mentioned before, at pick number 87 in the 3rd round. The Cowboys also added a new defensive coordinator, Mike Zimmer, who was the former head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. Look for him to be the frontrunner for the head coaching job in Dallas after the Cowboys failed to win yet another playoff game again this year. Ooh, I know, but it'll probably happen. Overall draft grade for the Cowboys is a B+. I thought Dallas did a great job addressing immediate needs except for one position, running back. Maybe they're happy with the 2 guys that they still have behind Zeke, but to not try to address this even in the latter rounds, I think, is a big miss. Strength of schedule this year for the Cowboys, their opponents had a combined winning percentage of 505, which is significantly higher than last year and tied for 12th hardest overall. So let's go game by game and see where the Cowboys will finish this year. We'll go with week number 1 at Cleveland. I think they get off to a good start. They beat the Browns in Cleveland week 1. Then they've got New Orleans at home for another win. Baltimore at home, which could be a loss. I will give it to Dallas, though, even though obviously I am a Ravens fan. Would love to see Baltimore go down there and kick some Cowboy butt, but I think the Cowboys are going to come away with a win there. At the Giants on Thursday Night Football, week 4, I'm going to give them a loss. Then they're at Pittsburgh, where they're going to beat the Steelers. They've got Detroit after that, and that's at home, but I still think that they're going to lose that game to the Detroit Lions, even though they went undefeated at home last year. That gives them at the bye week 4-2 record, not too bad, but then they're coming off that bye week and they are at San Francisco. Even though it's after the bye week, I'm still giving them a loss at San Fran. Then they've got at Atlanta for a win, Philly at home for a win, and then Houston at home on Monday Night Football. And out of the Texas teams, Houston is definitely by far a better football team than Dallas. I'm going to give that one to the Texans. They're at Washington after that, which I'm going to give them a loss. The Giants after that on Thursday, football at home, that's going to be a win. And then the following Monday, they've got Cincinnati, and the only reason why I'm giving them a win there against Cincinnati at home is because they're going from a Thursday game to a Monday game. They've got some extra time to prepare for Cincinnati, and I think it's going to be just what they need in order to win that game. At Carolina is a win. Tampa Bay at home is a win. At Philadelphia, we'll go with a loss there. And then to finish the season, Washington at home is a win. So the over-under for the Dallas Cowboys this year is 10.5, and I'm saying 11-6. So I'm right on par with them. I think 11-6 is probably the best that they're going to do. It's a mini step back from what they did last year, but let's face it, their schedule was so easy last year, it wasn't even funny. Everybody was giving them credit for all the easy teams that they had beaten. This year is much harder. I think 11-6, still a good team. They're still going to make the playoffs, and they're still not going to get a playoff win. Sorry, Cowboys fans. Next up is the Washington Commanders, who should seriously reconsider their name because, honestly, it sucks. Man, the Commodores finished the 2023 season at 4-13 and in last place of the NFC East. See where that nickname gets you? Yeah. I predicted them to actually go 4-13. Oh my gosh, I know. It's so amazing. The writing for me was on the wall for this team really early on. I said that they were lucky to finish 8-1 the previous year because they had an easy schedule, and I was right. I said their running backs were mediocre at best. I said McLaurin was overhyped. I also said that it would be Ron Rivera's last year in Washington, and I was right again. Some NFL ownership really just needs to listen to me when it comes to this kind of stuff. Last year, they were tied for the 12th toughest schedule, facing opponents with a combined winning record of 5-12. They do have a new head coach this year, who's Dan Quinn, who was fired from Atlanta as their head coach in 2020 after starting the season 0-5. Then he spent the last 2 years in Dallas as the defensive coordinator. They also have a new offensive coordinator in Cliff Kingsbury, who was an offensive analyst for USC last year. Eric Bieniemy was fired after 1 year in Washington, and I'm guessing that he wished that he just would have stayed in Kansas City. Let's take a downfield read and find out what other moves and changes the 2024 Comrades made and what they will look like and what you can expect from them this year. At quarterback last year, the Comanches had a failed experiment with Jacoby Brissett, who is now with the Patriots, and Sam Howell, who is now with the Seahawks and is throwing marvelously inaccurate from early reports. They were each only there for 1 year. This year, they took arguably the best quarterback in the draft at number 2 overall with Jaden Daniels. Last year at LSU, Daniels completed 72% of his passes for 3,812 yards, 40 touchdowns, and only 4 picks. He also rushed for another 1,134 yards and had another 10 rushing yards on the ground. Much like last year, the second quarterback taken in this year's draft will outperform the number 1 overall selection. Sorry, Caleb, not really. At running back, Austin Eckler joins Washington after 7 years with the Chargers. He's coming off arguably his worst year, averaging only 3.5 yards per carry, which was a career low, rushing 179 times for 628 yards and 5 touchdowns. Behind him, though, is Washington starter from last year, Brian Robinson Jr., entering his third year with the club. He carried just as many rushes as Eckler did, but for 733 yards, averaging 4.1 yards per carry with 5 touchdowns. So they have 2 semi-solid options in the backfield for the Cumberbuns. The wide receiver room consists of Terry McLaurin, coming off his 6th year in Washington, where last year he had 79 catches, which was tied for 24th, 1,002 yards, which was 28th, and 4 touchdowns. Behind him was Jaha Dodson, who caught 49 for 518 yards and 4 touchdowns in his 2nd year in the league. This year they have a new number 3 wide receiver with rookie Luke McCaffrey, who is the son of Ed McCaffrey, who played 13 years in the NFL, most of which was with the Denver Broncos. Luke had 71 receptions for 992 yards and 13 touchdowns at Rice last year. Washington drafted him in the 3rd round this last April. At tight end, Washington had Logan Thompson last year, who had 55 receptions, which was 14th for tight ends, 496 yards, which was 19th for tight ends, and 4 touchdowns, which was tied for 12th for tight ends. Well, he's 33 years old. They gave him the boot, and now he's playing for the 49ers as their backup behind Kittle. This year, the Commanders have Zach Ertz, who barely played last year with the Cardinals and who's going to be 34 this November, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense why you wouldn't just re-sign Logan Thompson. And they also have their 2nd round draft pick, Ben Sinnott from Kansas State, who caught 49 receptions, 676 yards, and 6 touchdowns last year. There's no doubt that Sinnott at 6'4" and 247 pounds is the tight end of the future for Washington. On the offensive line, the Salamanders' offensive line gave up more sacks last year than any other team. That's all you really need to know as to why they made multiple changes here. At left tackle was Charles Leno Jr., who will be 33 this year and who is currently a free agent. This year, Washington has rookie Brandon Coleman from TCU that they selected in the 3rd round of the draft. Left guard was Sadiq Charles, who is now playing with the Tennessee Titans. Their new left guard is Nick Allegretti, who spent the last 5 seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs. Their new center is former Dallas Cowboy Tyler Biadasz, who we mentioned before, in his 5th year in the league. At right guard, Sam Cosmi is returning and probably the best offensive lineman that Washington had last year. And at right tackle is Andrew Riley, who is also returning for his 2nd year with the club. Overall, the offense was 24 in total yards, 24th overall, 18th in passing yards, 27th in rushing, and 25th in points scored. Notable draft picks on offense for the Commandants this April were quarterback Jaden Daniels from LSU at the 2nd overall pick, tight end Ben Sinnott in the 2nd round at pick number 53 overall from Kansas State, offensive tackle Brandon Coleman in the 3rd round at number 67 from TCU, and wide receiver Luke McCaffrey selected later in the 3rd round at number 100 from Rice Baby. Overall, that's pretty good haul and a giant upgrade to this offense from where they were last year. Switching to the defensive side of the ball, last year, 2 of Washington's bigger playmakers were defensive ends Montez Sweat and Chase Young, who were both part of a midseason sell-off to the Chicago Bears and San Francisco 49ers, respectively. Defensive tackle Jonathan Allen had 5.5 sacks and 10 tackles for a loss. Defensive tackle Deron Payne had 13 tackles for a loss. And safety Jartavius Martin had 2 picks. Needless to say, this was not a very dynamic group last year. But they've made some additions, so let's take a look at that. The Commendators run a 4-3 defense, and this year they will have Dante Fowler Jr. at left defensive end, who spent the last 2 years with the Cowboys and is going on his 5th team in 10 years. He had 4 sacks and a forced fumble last year. At right defensive tackle is Dorrance Armstrong, who had 7.5 sacks and spent last 7 years with the Cowboys. You know, I guess Washington's motto this year is if you can't beat them, be them. Is that what we're trying to do there, Dan Quinn? Just seems like there's a lot of Washington players that are new this year that came over from Dallas last year. At defensive tackle, the Commanders still have the aforementioned Deron Payne entering his 7th year with the club and Jonathan Allen entering his 8th year with Washington. At the linebacker group, they have 2 new faces as well. At middle linebacker, they signed a 34-year-old Bobby Wagner, who spent most of his career with Seattle. Last year, Bobby had 96 solo tackles, which was good for 4th in the NFL and 3.5 sacks. At outside linebacker, they have Frankie Louvu, who spent his last 3 years in Carolina and had 66 solo tackles, 5.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles last year. And Jamin Davis entering his 4th year with Washington, who had 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 1 interception last year. In the defensive backfield, the Commensurators have 3 of 4 returning from last year, starting with Emmanuel Forbes Jr., who was a rookie last year, drafted number 16th overall, playing in 14 games last year with 1 interception and 11 passes defended, which was tied for 28th. At the other corner is Benjamin St. Juste, entering his 4th year with Washington. Last year, he had 1 interception, 2 forced fumbles, and 17 passes defended, which was good for 4th in the NFL. At safety is another 4th-year man, Derek Forrest, who played in just 5 games last year and has played only 30 games in the last 3 years. And then there's newcomer Jeremy Chinn, who spent the last 4 years in Carolina. Chinn hasn't played more than 12 games in either of the last 2 seasons and hasn't had an INT since 2021, with 2 INTs total in his whole NFL career. So I wouldn't say that it's a very stable or formidable group at this point in time. The Commanders' defense as a whole last year finished last in yards allowed, last in passing yards allowed, and last in points allowed. They were 27th in rushing yards, 23rd in total turnovers, 27th in INTs, and 26th in team sacks. This was one of the worst units in football last year, and just another reason why they finished with the 2nd worst record. Notable defensive draft picks this year are defensive tackle Johnny Newton from Illinois, who had foot surgery in the offseason and will not be participating in camp, taken in the 2nd round at pick number 36. I had Newton in the 1st round at number 27, but also mentioned that I could see him slipping to the 2nd round. This was a solid pick considering the Commanders' defense woes last season. Washington also took cornerback Mike Sanderstill from Michigan in the 2nd round at number 50 overall, who had 6 picks and 2 sacks last year and should be a great nickelback option. He could be a rock star someday in a photograph. Anyway, this was a strong pick, as some projected Sanderstill to go late 1st round or early 2nd. Overall draft grade for the Compactors, A-. They had 6 picks in the first 3 rounds, and they did not disappoint. They could start 4 or 5 of their first 6 picks almost immediately. Granted, almost their whole team was pretty much trashed last year. They still got very good quality in almost each pick that they made in this last draft. The strength of schedule this year for Washington is almost the same as last year at a 502. Let's go game by game and see where they land in 2024. Washington will start off at Tampa Bay, and I believe that's going to be a loss right away. They've got the New York Giants at home. That will be a win. Then they're at Cincinnati for Monday Night Football. There's a loss there. At Arizona in Week 4, I believe they lose that one as well. Then you've got Cleveland at home for a loss. At Baltimore for a loss. Then you've got Carolina at home. There's a win. Chicago at home. That is going to be a fun game to watch. Number 1, Caleb Williams. Number 2, Jalen Daniels. That should be fun to watch. I'm going to give that to the number 2 pick. Washington wins that. And then they go to the New York Giants the next week for a loss. They've got Pittsburgh at home after that, which I have them down for a loss, but I could very easily see them beating Pittsburgh in that game. And then they fly off to Philadelphia the next week for Thursday Night Football, which they will lose. They've got Dallas at home, going to give them the win there, and then Tennessee at home for another win before they enter their bye week. At this point, we're looking at about a 5-8 record for Washington. When they come out of the bye week, they're at New Orleans, and I gave them a loss there. I just think New Orleans is going to be a better team overall this year. Even though they're coming off the bye week, I think the Saints are going to have a run. Philadelphia at home, we're going to give them the win there. Atlanta at home, we're going to give them the win there. And then at Dallas, and as I mentioned before, I believe that last game of the year, Dallas is going to be fighting for something. Washington will have nothing to play for, and they will lose that game as well. So not bad overall. The over-under on wins for this season for Washington is 6.5. I've got them at 7-10. Really not bad for Washington, all things considered, at 7-10. It's almost twice as many wins as they had last year. And I think that shows that they're moving in the right direction, except for their name. Moving right along, let's move on to Philadelphia and cue the champion music. Cut. They're not champions. They're not going to be this year either. Forget about that. Let's just move on to Philadelphia. And if you didn't figure it out, I know that it's called the Washington Commanders. I call them everything else. Maybe it'll be something that, the ownership will take under advisement, just because I hate the name. Anyway, moving on to Philly. The Eagles were infamous last year for starting 10-1. I said that they would actually start 8-1, but then they shattered the bed and finished 11-6. I predicted them to go 13-4, and it looked like they could have hit that mark if they didn't forget how to play football. So, which Eagles team are we actually going to see this year? The first half Eagles team from last year or the second half? They had a strength of schedule last year of 481, which was tied for 20th most difficult. Let's take a downfield read, though, and see where the 2024 Eagles will finish. At quarterback, Jalen Hurts, who is a mediocre quarterback. Yes, I'm calling him a mediocre quarterback. Dak Prescott is a top 5. Jalen Hurts is mediocre. Up is down, black is white, cats and dogs, fighting, playing together. Yes, Jalen Hurts, I'm not convinced with. He's an above average quarterback, and I believe he showed his true colors at the end of last year. Hurts finished 14th in passing yards, 14th in pass completion, tied for 13th in passing touchdowns, 13th in QBR, 21st in passer rating. Does that sound like a top 5 or a top 10 quarterback to you? Because it sure doesn't to me. He finished not in the top 10 for anything important, except for maybe tush push. That was about it. He got all the 1-yard carries. That's about it. How do you do that with arguably the best offensive line in the NFL and A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith and DeAndre Swift in the backfield? You have all of these weapons, all of these tools, and you still couldn't even get in the top 10 for anything? Sorry. It's not going to get much better for him in his career. He's either going to have to learn how to elevate his game a little bit, or he will always be an above average quarterback. Pretty awful if you think about it. His passer rating was the same as Kyler Murray and Tommy DeVito. Seriously? Wow. Speaking of running backs and DeAndre Swift, he's not even there anymore. He's in Chicago. I think Nick Sirianni probably misused him anyway, so he's probably better off. Just kidding. He's in Chicago, which is way worse than Philly right now. Stupid. Good luck with that. Now the Eagles have former division rival running back Saquon Barkley, who has amassed over 1,000 yards in only 3 of his 6 years in the league, mostly due to injuries. Barkley was 16th in rushing yards last year with 962 yards and averaged 3.9 yards per carry. At wide receiver, A.J. Brown finished with 106 receptions, which was 8th for 1,456 yards, which was 5th, and 7 touchdowns in his second year with the Eagles. Devonta Smith finished with 81 receptions for 1,066, which was 20th, and 7 touchdowns as well in his third year with the team after being selected 10th overall in 2021. Paris Campbell is the new wide receiver 3 in Philly. He also comes over from the Giants, where he played in 12 games and had a disappointing 20 receptions for 104 yards, no touchdowns. That's what it takes most bad receivers to do in 4 or 5 games, but he managed to make that through a whole 12 games last year. Ouch. In his 4 years with the Colts before being in New York, he put up similar numbers in 3 of those 4 years. So I wouldn't expect too much from Campbell, even in Philadelphia at this point. At tight end for the Eagles, Dallas Goedert will be entering his 7th year after being selected in the 2nd round in 2018. Last year, he had 59 receptions, 592 yards, which was 14th, 4 tight ends, and 3 touchdowns in 14 games. The offensive line in Philly, as I mentioned before, they had one of the best offensive lines in football last year. However, they did go through some minor changes. At left tackle is still going to be Jordan Mailata, who was drafted by Philly in 2018. Left guard is still Landon Dickerson, who the Eagles drafted at number 37 overall in 2021. Right tackle is still now 34-year-old Lane Johnson, who Philly took number 4 overall in 2013, so long ago. Right guard Cam Jurgens, who Philly took at number 51 in 2022, is still on the team, but it looks as though they will be sliding him over to center this season. Their center last year was Jason, the Kelce brother that most people can actually tolerate, Kelce, who has since retired, which means their starting right guard this year will likely be Tyler Steen, who the Eagles drafted last year at number 65 in the 3rd round. This is still a relatively solid group up front. The offense as a whole finished last year 8th in total yards, 16th in passing, 8th in rushing, and 7th in points scored. They also have a new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, who was the offensive coordinator for the Chargers last year, and apparently couldn't convince the organization to give him their open head coaching position. And I can't say that I blame him. Notable offensive players drafted this year: running back Will Shipley from Clemson, that they selected in the 4th round at number 127, and that's all she wrote. They went defense early and didn't address the offense, which I don't believe that they needed to do anyway, until the 4th. Last year, they had linebacker Hassan Riddick, who finished with 11 sacks, which was tied for 15th, and 13 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 23rd, but he has flown to the Jets this season. They also lost defensive tackle Fletcher Cox to retirement. He had 5 sacks and a forced fumble last year as well. They still do have defensive end Josh Sweat, who finished last year with 6.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles, and defensive tackle Jalen Carter, who was in his rookie campaign last year and had 6 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 2 forced fumbles. Philly plays a 3-4 defense, and at that other defensive end spot is 4th-year man Milton Williams, who had a half a sack and 1 forced fumble last year. The Eagles linebacker group consists of newcomer outside linebacker Bryce Huff, who spent 4 years with the Jets and had 10 sacks, which was tied for 22nd, and 10 tackles for loss. And also they have outside linebacker Nolan Smith Jr., who the Eagles selected at number 30 overall in 2023, who recorded only 1 sack and 10 solo tackles last year. Ouch. Inside linebackers consist of 3rd-year man Nakobe Dean, who played in only 5 games last year due to a Lindsfrack injury in his foot, and Devin White, who spent the last 5 years in Tampa and recorded 2.5 sacks and 2 picks last year with the Bucs. The defensive backfield got younger this year in Philly as they selected cornerback Quinyon Mitchell with the 22nd pick overall from Toledo. I had Mitchell going at number 14 overall, so this was a tremendous value for the Eagles to get him at 22. At the other corner is 33-year-old Darius Slay Jr., who is entering his 5th year with the Eagles and had 2 picks in only 12 games due to a back injury last year. At the safety spots are 3rd-year man Reed Blankenship, who had 79 solo tackles, which is tied for 23rd, 3 picks, which was tied for 25th, and 11 passes defended, which was tied for 28th. And the return of C.J. Gardner, who was with the Eagles for 1 year in 2022, then went to Detroit last season where he only played in 3 games after tearing his pectoral. Now he's back in Philly. Overall, the Eagles' D was the demise of the team last year as they finished 26th in yards allowed, 31st in passing yards, 10th in rushing yards, and 30th in points allowed. They were also 25th in total takeaways and INTs, and tied for 19th in team sacks. Notable defensive players drafted this year. I mentioned Quinyon Mitchell earlier, which was a no-brainer with how talented this kid is. And they were able to follow up that cornerback pick with cornerback Cooper DeJean from Iowa in the 2nd round with pick 40. I had Cooper at number 22. It's almost not fair that they were able to get 2 of the best cornerbacks in the draft. What in the hell are other teams allowing this to happen for? In the 3rd round, the Eagles drafted edge rusher Jalix Hunt from Houston Christian. But maybe the coolest pick out of the entire draft for them was in the 5th round when Philly took Jeremiah Trotter Jr. from Clemson, whose dad spent 8 seasons with Philly. That was some really cool stuff to see and also a little bit predictable. Overall draft grade, though, how could I not give him an A? They have a cornerback duo who could be dominant for the next decade. And the pick of Jeremiah Trotter, that was just awesome. So A for the Eagles on their draft 2024. Great job. Their strength of schedule this year is way easier than it should be. Tied for 21st. Their opponent's winning percentage last year was a combined 491. That's right alongside with the Colts and the Titans. And we haven't gotten to the AFC yet, but they didn't finish very well. Neither one of them even made the playoffs. Let's take a look at their schedule real quick, and we will surmise how Philly will end this season. Starting the year, they have Green Bay, and I'm torn with this one. Green Bay, it's a overseas game. It's not really a home game, but it's marked as a home game on the schedule. They've got Green Bay, and I've got them for a loss, and I really went kind of back and forth with this one. What I'm basing this off of really is how hot Green Bay ended last year and how cold Philly ended last year. So I'm going to give that one to Green Bay, but that could very easily go right back to Philly. Nobody has home field advantage. Could go either way. Then they've got week 2. They've got Atlanta on Monday Night Football. I think they've got enough time, and there's a lot of time in there. It's a home game also. They're going to win that one. At New Orleans in week 3, they're going to lose that. Then they're at Tampa week 4, and I think that's a win. So at the bye, which they have early this year in week 5, they could be 3-1, but I'm going to say they're 2-2. Coming off the bye, they've got Cleveland at home. That's a win. Then they're at the Giants. I have as a loss. I think that could easily be a win, though. But at the Giants, we'll go loss for now. At Cincy, that's a loss. Jacksonville at home, win. At Dallas, loss. Washington at home, Thursday Night Football. That's going to be a win. At the Rams, I'll give them a win there as well. But then they go to Baltimore, and they get kicked in the teeth. That's a loss. Carolina at home, win. Pittsburgh at home, win. At Washington, loss. Dallas at home was a win, and they will finish against the Giants this year, and I'm going to call that one a win as well. The over-under on Philadelphia is 10.5 this year. I've got them at 10-7. I know it's one game worse than what they had last year, but I will say that is the basement for Philly. As you kind of think about what I just said about all the different games, minimum 10 games won. They could beat Green Bay in week 1. They could sweep the Giants. They could sweep Washington. Heck, they could go 13-4. But I'm not 100% sold on Hurts or Barkley. So either one of them, those are two really big weapons to have question marks on, which is why 10-7 this year, and we'll see if they make the playoffs. Lastly, in the NFC East is the New York Football Giants. Last year, I said that the Giants would finish the 2023 season at 8-9. They finished at 6-11. Granted, they lost quarterback Daniel Jones after 6 games due to a torn ACL. I think they could have won 2 more games last year to prove me right. Right? The Giants were tied for 12th in strength of schedule last year as well, and it's not going to get any easier for them this year. Brian Daboll got to keep his coaching job, but others weren't so fortunate. They pretty much changed over every other coach underneath them. This year's team has an uphill battle for sure. So tell you what, let's just get into it. Let's see if they made the right moves and see if they can be a contender this year. At cornerback, they have Daniel Jones, overpaid. Even in the 6 games that Jones played last year, he was terrible. Only 2 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. A quarterback rating of a 36.3, which was between Mac Jones and Ryan Tannehill, and a passer rating of 70.5, which is in the Tyson Bagent and Bailey Zappi range. Don't worry, though. They have Drew Lock as their backup this year. At running back, we already mentioned that Saquon is gone to the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Giants went out and got Devin Singletary as his replacement. Singletary is going to be 27 years old this year. And in the 5 years in the NFL, he has yet to touch 1,000 yards rushing. Last year, he gained 898 rushing yards, which was good for 21st in the league on 4.2 yards per carry, which is actually the worst of his career to date. And he only had 4 touchdowns. Singletary is a significant downgrade to their running game, and we'll get into that later. At wide receiver, the Giants may have gotten the best wide receiver in the draft in Malik Neighbors. And come on, I know it's between him and Marvin Harrison Jr., and it's close. But at some point, you have to start to wonder, was Marvin Harrison Jr. the first picked wide receiver in the draft because his name is Marvin Harrison Jr.? When Malik Neighbors could have went to Arizona, and I don't think anybody would have batted an eye had it not been for Marvin Harrison Jr. having the name that he does. Malik had 89 receptions for 1,569 yards and 14 touchdowns last year at LSU. Good enough stats for you? I think so. He's going to be the only difference maker on this offense, though. After him, it's the same class of characters. Darius Slayton, entering his 6th year with the G-Men, has never broken 800 yards in a season. Last year, he had 50 receptions, 770 yards, which was good enough for 46th, whoop-de-doo, and 4 touchdowns. Wide receiver 3 is probably going to be Wan'Dale Robinson, entering his 3rd season. Last year, he caught 60 balls for 525 yards and 1 touchdown. Then there's Jalen Hyatt, who couldn't meet expectations as a rookie last year, and Allen Robinson II. If ever there was a team that should be pushing for Brandon Ayuk or Devontae Adams, it's this one. Why have they not at least brought in Michael Thomas? He could be your number 2, arguably, or a number 3 guy in your wide receiver room. At tight end, Darren Waller hated playing in New York so bad that he decided to retire at 31 years old after his first and only season playing for the Giants last year. Now they have Daniel Bellinger, who in his second year last year had 25 receptions, 255 yards, and 0 touchdowns. But, and I'm not 100%, I think Daniel Bellinger was the guy who had an eye injury into the season. He got poked in the eye, couldn't see. So I'm just happy that he's back, but not a great tight end option for the Giants. And I start to wonder if they know how bad their weapons actually are, that they haven't upgraded some of these positions. On offensive line, the Giants' offensive line wasn't good last year, and honestly, it's been a hot mess for several years, and they don't seem to want to address that either. If you've watched Hard Knocks, you could hear their GM even talking about it, how bad their offensive line was, and even if they had Kermit the Frog back there throwing passes, that they still wouldn't have won that many games. At left tackle, Andrew Thomas is in his fourth year with New York after being drafted number 4 overall in 2020. He was decent last year despite fighting off injuries. Left guard was Justin Pugh, who will be 34 years old this year. He is currently a free agent and was inconsistent at best last year. This year looks like Jermaine Illuminor, who played in Las Vegas the last 3 years, is going to take over that position. Center was rookie John Michael Schmitz, selected in the second round from the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Unfortunately, it was an up and down season for him as well. At right guard was Ben Bredesen, who is now with Tampa Bay this year. In his place, I think they upgraded. It's John Runyon from Green Bay. At right tackle is Evan Neal, who is just as bad in his second year last year as he was in his rookie campaign when they drafted him 7th overall in 2022. Overall, New York's offense was 29th in total yards, 31st in passing, 16th in rushing, and 30th in scoring. So let me say that again, 31st in passing, 16th in rushing. So the best part of their offense last year is now in Philadelphia. Notable offensive draft picks this year. We mentioned before Malik Neighbors taken number 6 overall from LSU. I had him going number 5 to the Chargers. And then the Giants taking Rome Odunze at number 6. Either way, they needed a wide receiver 2 or 3. In the 4th round, they selected tight end Theo Johnson from Penn State at number 107. So 2 very good picks for their offense for this upcoming year. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, though, their big-time playmakers consisted of linebacker Kayvon Thibodeau, who led the team with 11.5 sacks, which was tied for 12th, had 12 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 29th, and 3 forced fumbles, which was tied for 11th. Inside linebacker Micah McFadden had 12 tackles for a loss, as well as 1 sack, 1 INT in his second season. Linebacker Bobby Okereke had 11 tackles for a loss, 2.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, which was tied for 4th, and 2 INTs. Safety Xavier McKinney, who had 78 solo tackles, which was tied for 26th, 3 INTs, which was tied for 25th, and 11 passes defended, which was tied for 28th. But he's in Green Bay now. So let's take a look at who the 2024 Giants do have on defense. New York runs a 3-4 defense. At left defensive end is third-year man DJ Davidson, who had half a sack last year. Not great. And right defensive end is 31-year-old Rakeem Nunez-Roches, who came over to New York from Tampa Bay and also had only a half a sack and not much else. Dexter Lawrence will be lining up at nose tackle for his 6th year with the Giants after being selected 17th overall in 2019. And last year, he had 4.5 sacks and 53 tackles. Looking at the linebacker crew, new outside linebacker from the Panthers, where he spent his first 5 years, is Brian Burns, who had 8 sacks, 15 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 13th, and a forced fumble. And outside linebacker on the other side is Thibodeau, and the inside linebackers are Okereke and McFadden, who I all mentioned earlier. So relatively the same group of guys, and they had a giant upgrade with Brian Burns, probably the best free agent outside linebacker that they could have gotten. In the defensive backfield is cornerback Deonte Banks, who had 2 INTs and 11 passes defended in his rookie campaign last year after being selected 24th overall. And cornerback Cordale Flott in his 3rd year with the G-Men, accumulating 1 INT, 5 passes defended, and 1 forced fumble last year. Free safety Jason Pinnock is back for his 3rd year after tallying 2 forced fumbles, 2 INTs, 6 passes defended, and 59 solo tackles. And rookie Tyler Nubin, who was drafted this April in the 2nd round from the Minnesota Golden Gophers and had 5 picks last year. As a whole, the Giants D finished 27th in yards allowed, 19th in passing yards allowed, 29th in rushing yards allowed, 26th in points allowed. They were also 29th in team sacks. However, they did finish 1st in total takeaways and were tied for 3rd in INTs. So Those tip drills and punch out drills are really paying off. New defensive coordinator Shane Bowen, who was with Tennessee as their defensive coordinator the last 3 years, will be taking over for Wink Martindale, who couldn't hack it in the NFL and is now a defensive coordinator for Michigan. Good luck there. I'm sure it'll only be a few years before he's a head coach at a local high school. Notable defensive draft picks this year for the G-Men. As mentioned before, safety Tyler Nubin, taken 47th overall, who will be an immediate starter. In the third round, they went right back to DBs and picked up cornerback Andrew Phillips from Kentucky at pick number 70. Overall draft grade, solid B+. They needed a wide receiver. They got Neighbors. They didn't do anything stupid like trading out of that spot. They got what they needed to get. Solid. They needed a safety. They got Nubin, who will most likely start. They needed a tight end with the loss of Waller. Got him too. They also drafted some depth at cornerback and running back. All good stuff. So solid B+ for the New York Giants this year. Their strength of schedule this year will be tough. They are tied for 6th with the Bills as far as their opponent's winning percentage from last year being .516. Damn. Let's break down their schedule real quick. I don't think they deserve that. Can we give these guys a break? Holy cow, they weren't great last year, and now you're going to throw a tougher schedule at them. That's fantastic. So, New York Giants, let's see. They got Minnesota week 1 at home, and they're going to open up with a win. Then they're at Washington where they're going to lose. They're at Cleveland where they're going to lose. And they've got Dallas at home Thursday night football. And I think they're going to upset the Cowboys there, and they're going to take that game. So 2-2 in their first 4. At Seattle is going to be a loss. Cincinnati at home loss. Philly at home loss. At Pittsburgh on Monday Night Football loss. And this went downhill real quick for the G-Men. Starting off 2-2 and then hitting the hardest part of their schedule. They've got Washington at home. That's going to be a win. Then they've got an overseas game against Carolina. I'm not sure what team is better at this point. I'm going to give it to Carolina, though. That's a big question mark. It is overseas. It could be anybody's game. At the bye, they're 3-7 is what it looks like. Maybe 4-6 if they're lucky. Then they come back and they've got Tampa Bay at home. Let's give them the win. At Dallas, that's going to be a loss on Thursday Night Football. New Orleans at home for a win. Baltimore at home for a loss. At Atlanta for a loss. Indianapolis at home. I gave them the win there. That's questionable as well. But then they end the season at Philadelphia. I think Philly's going to be playing for something at the end of the year. The Giants are not. They might be making some moves there. Who knows if Brian Daboll is going to be there or not. Over under for the Giants this year, you're looking at 6.5. I got them at 6-11. I think it's fair. 6-11 for the second year in a row. And honestly, I think Daboll might not have a job at the end of the season. If not, maybe they're looking for something to start the 2025 season with. And I will say it right now, I don't believe it's his fault. I don't think that they've got the right tools in there. If he loses his job, it's a shame. They've got a harder schedule than what they should probably have this year, but that's life in the NFL. What are you going to do? But that is it for the NFC East for the upcoming season. I hope that you all enjoyed it. And as always, please like, please share, comment, subscribe. What did you like? What did you not like? Do you think I'm full of crap? Whatever it is. Again, I'm also on Facebook. I'm on X, YouTube, Spotify. My site is www.downfieldread.com. So follow on everything so you don't miss a thing. Thank you for taking this downfield read with me. Until next time, I'm Jeff D. Have a good one, everyone.